Hello, and welcome to this issue of Discovering Truth at the Movies. My name is David Lance. Today, we'll be looking at the movie Star Wars and using it to explore some of the things that C.S. Lewis has to say in his book, Mere Christianity, as well as the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1. You know, perhaps you've heard about Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein. Epstein is someone who was convicted of having preyed on many young, often underage women, and recently died in prison. Some say it was a suicide. That's the official report. Others say that perhaps he was murdered. Harvey Weinstein is a Hollywood film director who has been accused of having soliciting sex from various actresses in order to give them an increase in their career. In both cases, Jeffrey Epstein had a picture of Bill Clinton in a blue dress and heels at his pedophile mansion in an island in the Caribbean, while Harvey Weinstein had many powerful friends, including the Clintons. You know, throughout our culture, there are many local Jeffrey Epsteins and Harvey Weinsteins who have surrounded themselves with rich and powerful friends who call evil good. And so today, looking at this, we see that increasingly America has turned its back on God, and people like Darth Vader, people like Epstein and Weinstein fight for the dark side, and they love it so. You know, in Romans chapter 1, verse 21, the Apostle Paul said, "For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or even give thanks to him. They became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened." Well, the question that I have for us today is, what happens to us when we call evil good? Who is this guy? Perhaps you know him. Which team does he play for? Well, we all know that this is Darth Vader. He plays for the dark side. He plays for the bad guys. Even Darth Vader knows he's on the dark side. He knows that the dark side is evil, but he doesn't care. He even encourages his son Luke Skywalker to come with him and to join the dark side. And you might say, that's the dark side. And Vader's response would be, that's right, it's the dark side, as in evil, as in bad, as in wrong. But what's your point? That's the way we've come to treat evil. No big deal. Dark side, don't worry about it. It's just another worldview that makes me feel good about myself. And so let's look at a little bit of the movie background to Star Wars for those of you who perhaps have not seen it in the last 30 years or so. And so in the movie, there is a clear distinction between right and wrong. Even the bad guys don't try to disguise the fact that they are allied with the dark side. Darth Vader is quite at home being evil, and Obi-Wan Kenobi can do nothing but what is good, both in terms of how he uses power and uses the Force. In fact, there is a scene where he uses the power of the Force to tell the Empire soldiers that these are not the drones you're looking for. Go look someplace else. Han Solo is in everything for himself. Hans flies off into space when the Empire attacks, abandoning Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker to their fate. But suffering from a guilty conscience, Han Solo then comes to the rescue at the last minute to rescue Luke and the rebellion just as his friends are running out of options. And so let's dig a little bit deeper into God's word and especially into some thoughts by an apologist, C.S. Lewis, who wrote a book called Mere Christianity. Now, thinking about Han Solo, remember him? He gets paid and then he flies off just before the final battle between the rebels and Darth Vader's fleet. But then he has an attack of a guilty conscience. And so he comes back just in time to save the day. Now, C.S. Lewis finds it interesting that humanity has something that we'll call a guilty conscience. And so he says in his book, Mere Christianity, the laws of nature as applied to stones or trees may mean what nature in fact does. But if you turn to the law of human nature, the law of decent behavior, it is a different matter. He says that the law of gravity tells you what stones do if you drop them, but the law of human nature tells you what human beings ought to do but do not do. And so a guilty conscience is something that pricks our minds and says, you should be doing something else other than the bad stuff that you're doing right now. And so if we listen to that conscience, we're actually listening to God. So C.S. Lewis goes on to write, it begins to look as if we shall have to admit that there is more than one kind of reality, that in this particular case, there is something above and beyond the ordinary facts of men's behavior, and yet quite definitely real, a real law which none of us made, but which we find pressing upon us. And that's from his book, Mere Christianity. And so it's like this. If you've ever gotten a letter, you know what's in a letter. And so you know that letters get received all the time. Sometimes we open the letters, sometimes we don't. But in the same way, God has sent you letters designed to prick your conscience. Sometimes they come in the form of people who enter into your life. And so letters are like chocolates. You never know what you're going to find, so open them. Well, as a personal reflection on all of this, I once worked for a telecommunications company, and one of the products that we sold was web hosting. Now, one of the things that we would sell then was the opportunity to move the web domain from the web hosting company that they were using over to our company. But that required a signature of the person who owned the domain name. And in a particular instance where I had a client that wanted to transfer the domain name, we came to find out that was actually owned by the web design guy who had created it in the first place, and the person had put it on his web hosting service. And so legally, we had to get a signature from the web design guy, not from the customer who used the website. Well, my boss's boss, basically the regional sales director, said, just forge the letter, and that way we'll be able to port the domain name. But I felt very uncomfortable with this. Now, I knew it was a long shot to try to send an email to the person who had actually designed the web page, but I did it anyway. I felt at the very least, I need to try to get in touch with the person. Well, believe it or not, I actually got in touch with the person, and he was willing to go ahead and sign the paperwork and signed over the domain name so that we could legally process all of that. And so one of the things that I discovered later on was that my manager admitted to me that he too had been uncomfortable with the regional sales manager's declaration that we should forge the web hosting person's name. And he was really glad that I had done the right thing. But in thinking about this, I had taken the action on my own. My manager had not stood up for me to his boss because he was afraid. And so one of the things that I think that as we think about Darth Vader and the Star Wars, eventually it was Darth Vader who came to the side of light. Why? Because people cared enough about him to confront him in the evil that he was partaking in. And so he watched Luke and he watched Obi-Wan Kenobi and was won over by the testimony of their life. What about you and me? Are we living a life that testifies of the truth of the gospel so that we might win some to come from the dark side over to the light side? Well, that's some information about my podcast, Discovering Truth at the Movies. I want to encourage you to go ahead and sign up for that by going to bit.ly/2 and the letters MAFT SQ. I'll put that in the post when I go ahead and post this. But I want to also consider you to share this information with your church, youth, or young adult ministry, especially if you're a leader in that regard in your congregation. One of the other things to notice is that when you sign up for the podcast, you'll also get my monthly newsletter, Conversations with the Culture. I write that once a month. Also, you'll gain information on accessing the anthologies that I've written of past issues. And what I'd like to do when you sign up is to send you Discovering Godly Leadership at the Movies, which is the first one in the series with my thanks. You can learn more about my other ebooks in the series at wisejargon.com/@the-movies, and that's with the letters in between the letters at the movies, there's a hyphen. So it's @-the-movies. Well, thank you so much for listening in today. And I hope that this has been of help to you in thinking about your walk with Christ.